We are calling this meeting back to order. Thank you so much for your patience. Please continue.
Thank you. So the next thing I wanted to cover is some of the work in the financial area. And so we do audit the Commonwealth's financial statements annually, as well as all of the public colleges and universities and the lottery and ABC, so all of the entities that prepare financial statements in the Commonwealth. And during my first 4 years, we've overseen the implementation of two significant accounting standards in the Commonwealth, and those are related to leases and subscription-based information technology arrangements. And those resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars of additional assets and liabilities being reported in the Commonwealth, as well as the college and universities' financial statements. And we, in our work we did over that area, we noticed numerous issues, as well as adjustments that were necessary to the financial statements. It was new, it was complex. We developed experts in our office that even gave presentations at a national level on the implementation of that. And so we made quite a few adjustments and also issued quite a few internal control and compliance recommendations related to those. In this time, we also continue to identify other significant adjustments to the Commonwealth's financial statements, and over the past few years, those adjustments have totaled over several $1 billion as well. And so, one of the things that is going on in the Commonwealth right now is that a lot of agencies have lost a lot of existing staff in the accounting and financial reporting area, and we've noted that and made some recommendations related to that for the Commonwealth. And as a result of that, we have seen more issues with the financial statements having incorrect amounts in there. And so that's something that our office has been working on. I've made several organizational changes to our office. We took a look at our teams. We had been through a strategic planning process, and we completed that process. And our strategic plan has a technological focus because we do think in order to stay kind of up on auditing and the future of auditing and make sure that we're positioning our office to be able to do our audits most efficiently and effectively, that we need to explore things like using AI for auditing procedures and using more technology. We are looking at robotic process automation and have automated several functions in our office, like if it's a report that we issue a whole lot of times, then we create a template and it'll automatically push findings into it and format it and have it ready to go. We've also looked at that for some of our administrative operations as well. So instead of a person entering salary adjustments, especially when we have like statewide adjustments, we run it through a bot, and it processes adjustments and updates our system accordingly. And so as a result of that strategic initiative, we've also, like I said, combined some teams, and one of our new teams is our process innovation team, and that's to help us to implement those strategies and look at opportunities to be, for process improvements and not just automation, but other improvements as well in our office. We also have every 3 years, we have an outside a group, a team of individuals from other state auditors' offices come and review the quality of our work. We've had 3 of those reviews since I've been the auditor, and in both times we received a pass with no deficiencies, which is the highest rating. And the last time, one of the team leaders actually said our office it was one of the least amount of things that they had found. Usually they find a few little things that you have going on, and he said it was one of the cleanest ones that he had been on since he had been doing reviews. And then in terms of challenges, and I had this on here as an accomplishment, but it's also been a challenge for our office, and that's our workforce management. Our staff is key to us being able to complete our audit work plan, and this has been an incredibly challenging time in the audit profession. There is a national shortage of accounting majors. I know I serve on an advisory board at VCU. I think they lost over the past 10 years, their accounting program has been cut in half in terms of the number of graduates. And so this is something that everybody's going through right now. We naturally have some turnover because auditing isn't for everyone, and so we've always had turnover. But during my time as the auditor, despite the turnover and the additional challenges for recruiting, we have been able to maintain our workforce. We have newer people, but we have been able to fill the positions that we're losing, like I said, because it's a very competitive environment right now, and we've been able to complete our work plan and continue to do that. And like I mentioned, even in a challenging time in terms of having additional federal work that we've had to do. For 11 years, consecutive 11 years, we've been recognized as one of Richmond's top workplaces. And we reinstituted our internship program to help us with recruiting. And for the past 2 years, that program has been recognized as a top Virginia employer for interns as well. And so that is some of the accomplishments of the office. And I listed some of, like I said, some additional background on me as well as professional accomplishments. One thing I would like to mention is that during this year, I was asked to serve on the AICPA Auditing Standards Board, which is the senior standard setting board in the nation for standards for government. It's government and as well as private sector entities. And that's something that I was asked to represent government organizations on that board. And so that really helps in terms of making sure that we have a voice, those of us that audit in a government environment, in the standards that we have to follow when we're auditing, and so that they recognize some of the challenges that and unique complexities of the government auditing environment. And that's a brief overview. And if you have any questions about anything that's on my resume or in the cover letter or the information that I just communicated, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. And I do want to repeat that JLARC did recommend the reappointment for this position. Are there any questions from the committee?
Madam Chair.
Delegate Converse-Fowler.
Madam Chair, I have a comment and a motion.
Please go for it.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your innovation and the improvements you've made. And go Women in STEM. I wanted to make that motion to certify Stacey A. Henshaw as qualified to be elected as the Auditor of Public Accounts for term of 4 years commencing February 1st, 2025.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. I see Delegate O'Quinn.
Madam Chair, speaking to the motion.
Yes, please.
Madam Chair, I'd like to thank you for being here today. And, I know the Auditor of Public Accounts sometimes is one of those entities that doesn't get a ton of attention, and you probably prefer to keep it that way. And I can tell you that, I spent a few years in the House of Delegates with barely even knowing that the Auditor of Public Accounts existed until we had an entity in our part of the state that ended up needing a deep dive from the APA. And I had a brand new appreciation for the breadth of work that you do and how important it is for the Commonwealth of Virginia to make sure that we're all on track and the money is going where it's supposed to be going and so on and so forth. And so certainly you have all the qualifications to do the job. It's already motion been made and seconded, but I would have also seconded and agree with the fact that I think you'll do a fantastic job continuing in this position. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So it's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? And so that motion passes, and we will report that to the proper people that today has taken place. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And now we will hear from our Commissioner of Elections, Susan Beals. Thank you. Please come forward. And you have a presentation for us, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we can cue that up. Are you doing the slides, or did you need some? Okay, yep. Then we will turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, it is good to be with you again. Today, I would like to review with you the 2024 general election, give you some numbers, take you on a preview of our post-election survey results that we do when we survey our registrars every year after the general election, and then talk to you about some of the preparations that we made for the January 7th special elections that were conducted during a state of emergency. 2024 really was the year of elections in Virginia. We had 175 days of voting. We spent 48% of the year with the polls open. That was 5 elections, 2 primaries, the presidential and the congressional, the general in November, and then 2 special elections. The credit for making this year happen really goes to our registrars, our electoral board members, and our thousands and thousands of officers of election who continued to show up and serve their fellow citizens with, making sure these elections could happen by staffing polling places. We also had 2 post-election pre-certification audits. So that means the week before Thanksgiving, when a lot of folks thought the election was over, a lot of people in localities were conducting risk-limiting audits, and they were hand-counting ballots to ensure that the results of the election matched what the machines reported. We also had 1 congressional recount. That was the congressional primary for the 5th congressional district this summer. And that was a recount that was rather large. It involved 24 localities. And that was also a big lift for those folks. To give you a sense of what new voter registrations look like over the last 5 years, what we've really seen is that registrations peak in our presidential election years. I promise I didn't touch anything. Okay. So you can see what it looked like in 2020 and 2024. And in the years in between, it tends to sort of settle around 250, 260,000 people. The items that were on the ballot this year, the president and vice president seats, 11 congressional seats, a Senate seat, there was a constitutional amendment, and then we also had some local races, some mayors and town councils. Looking at voter turnout for the last 5 years, you can see we had about a 70% turnout in 2024. Most of our presidential elections, going back as far as you want to go, it's usually in the 72, 74, 70% range. That's what we see typically. And you can see the turnout for those years in the middle there. What did that mean for the 2024 election in specific? That was 4.5 million ballots cast. It was about 48% of voters who chose to vote on Election Day and 52% who voted either early or by mail. This is a breakdown of the hard numbers on that. You can see we had 2.1 million people who voted on Election Day, but 1.8 voted early in person, about 400,000 by mail, 95,000 used a drop-off location to drop off their ballot, and then what's hiding there you can't see is about 200 people had a designated representative that dropped off their ballot. This is an interesting slide because it shows you the trend of absentee voting in Virginia since the laws were changed, and it shows you who is choosing to vote absentee. Now, this includes both early and mail, and you can see that it was super high in 2020 with 63%, but then in the intervening years, it went down into the 30s and then came back up to 52% for the presidential in 2024. Provisional ballots accounted for about 3% of the ballots cast. That is higher than we usually see. We saw a high number of provisional ballots at about 123,000 this year. That was mostly due to same-day registration. We saw 89,000 Election Day same-day registrations and 25,000 during the early voting period. What's important to note is that same-day registration is a provisional process. Of course, in a presidential year, you're going to expect a higher number, but I think that what's important to note is what that is adding on to the post-election process when you're also trying to conduct canvass and you're trying to determine absentee results by precinct and you're having to determine the registration eligibility of 123,000 people in a matter of days. But we'll get into that a little bit more a little later on. This year's voter education campaign focused on making sure that voters know that election officials in Virginia are committed to making their vote count. We had a 5-week statewide voter education campaign. We educated Virginians about how to register, the timing of Election Day, how to early vote, important deadlines like when was the last day to request an absentee ballot, when were those things due back to your registrar's office, a lot of work around accessibility options, and then assuring voters that no matter how you vote, whether it's early or by mail or on Election Day, it will count. For that campaign, we used newspaper ads in 18 major daily newspapers, including translated newspapers in Spanish, Korean, and Vietnamese. We also were in numerous radio markets, including an additional to this list 16 very rural markets as defined by the Office of Management and Budget. We also made use of digital ads and banners again this year. That was very successful. You can see that ad sort of at the bottom there of the phone. It tells you that you can click on it and we'll take you directly to our website to get information. You can see some other examples of the digital ads. And then we did a lot of work with social media shareables that other groups will take and will share around social media. So these were the ones that were new this year to ensure that everyone knew that in Virginia, we make sure that your ballot counts. The results of that campaign, we had 91 million impressions, leading to 201,000 clicks to vote.virginia.gov, and those were online and radio and print. Now let's move on to the post-election survey. This is a survey that's sent out every year in December. It is sent to our general registrars, and we ask them questions about what their resource needs are, what challenges they faced, what were some new issues that they saw this year, and this year we asked them also about how they felt about the reliability of ELECT's systems. What we heard from them is 65% of general registrars reported the improved reliability of Veris over previous years, and I think that that's a testament to the work that we have done in the last 12 months to try to make the performance of Veris a priority. For resource needs, they highlighted staffing and space as their top 2 needs, and they did say that their biggest challenge was for their locality in relation to same-day registration. 63% reported that. Some of the same-day registration issues that we saw, like I said, the volume was about 123,000. It also is what's happening in that post-election timeline, that very condensed period where once Election Day happens, registrars have about 6 days to consider the eligibility of every single one of those registrations, like they would a normal registration, and process them. Sometimes it can require even more research because it is someone who is moving from another place in Virginia, so you're having to go back and look at past records. And as I said, there are competing priorities with the canvass and with entering results by precinct. And something else I just want to note here is, this is not the distribution of same-day registrations was not proportional to the population of the state. Because most of the same-day registrations occurred in college towns, you might have a registrar's office that has 1.5 employees, like Harrisonburg, that got 4,000 or 2,000 registrations, right? So it's not just like Fairfax County is going to get the most, but they're okay because they have a great big staff and they can handle it. What we saw was smaller localities that happen to be homes to colleges got very, very high numbers of same-day registrations. I also wanted to follow up and report back to you on the U.S. Postal Service because we had talked about that before and what were some of the issues that we saw there. The USPS did rise to the occasion and they did reach out to us. We worked with them very closely. I think we talked to them every single day of early voting and we flagged issues to them on a consistent basis no matter where we found them for them to address. The numbers that you see there on the right are the types of issues that registrars saw. Those are not the number of the issue, that's the number of localities that had that issue. So 30 localities had late return ballots, 42 localities had delays in ballots getting to voters, 39 had undeliverable mail, either they're mailing it out, it's coming back undeliverable from the voter, or the voter's mailing it, it's coming back undeliverable from the office. 29 localities had no postmark on their ballots, 27 had no IMBs, and those are critical because when you're getting to that period after Election Day and it's that late mail arriving on Friday, whether or not that gets counted depends on whether it has a postmark or the IMB can be read. and then lost ballots 32. So we were pleased to see the ramp up of support that we received from the USPS, but we will be sure to remind them that Virginia has an election in 2025 that is just as important, and that we look forward to working with them again in close coordination. I also wanted to brief you on the January 7th special elections. On the Friday before this election, the governor declared a state of emergency. And at that point, we decided that we needed to come up with a plan for if a precinct could not open. And when the governor declares a state of emergency, it gives the commissioner of elections additional authority to make plans to allow for voting to continue if an election is happening. So the plan that we devised was that if any polling place could not open on Tuesday because of a power outage. Typically in the summertime, if we have a power outage, we can move you into the parking lot. We couldn't move you into the parking lot when it's 20 degrees outside. We decided that we would ask voters to come to the registrar's office and vote a provisional ballot there. We also, once we issued that to the 12 GRs who were involved in that election, we hand-delivered needed supplies that they identified that they needed for that election. And then the other thing that we did is reached out to registrars and said, tell us the precincts, tell us the polling places that you have in your locality that are on roads that don't get plowed fast. Tell us what we need to target. And so we came up with a list of 13 polling places across, I think, 5 counties, and gave them to VDEM and to VDOT, and they got them plowed, so that there was no reason for voters not to be able to reach their polling places. That is a cot. That is what a registrar slept on in her office to make sure that she was there in the morning to open the polls. That is not unique. Many of these registrars slept in their offices to ensure that they were there to be able to open in the morning. And I think it's important for y'all to realize the level of commitment that these people had to ensuring that this election happened. They spent so much time thinking of every single eventuality, everything that could go wrong, dotting all their I's. This group of 11 registrars that was involved in this election, they had already had 3 major elections last year. They had a very, very contentious 5th Congressional District primary that a lot of them played out on their front lawn with people screaming at each other. They had a recount of that primary, and then they had 2 special elections with early voting over Christmas, and their election day during a state of emergency. So they went through a lot. And I'd like to just extend a special thanks to them, to the registrars, the deputy registrars, the staff, the officers of election in the following counties: Amelia, Appomattox, Buckingham, Cumberland, Fluvanna, Goochland, Henrico, Hanover, Louisa, Powhatan, Prince Edward. Those 11 counties had a heck of a year last year, and they made this happen. They reached out on their own to their sheriff's deputies to make sure that they would pick up their officers of election and get them to the polling places so they could open. That was one of our chief concerns, is if you don't have enough officers of election, you can't open. And so we had to have people there. They also took the step of delivering their equipment early. Equipment gets delivered the Monday before an election. Well, the storm was coming Sunday, so a lot of them delivered on Saturday or early Sunday morning. We did end up having 2 power outages in Powhatan precincts on Election Day. Both of those were resolved by 9 a.m., and 8 voters did end up using the contingency plan that we had put in place, and they voted at the registrar's office in Powhatan. And also, super extra thanks to the SEC and VDEM and VITA and VDOT for supporting us throughout this and making sure that this worked. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions and talk about whatever you'd like. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we also, I think, can, hopefully in a bipartisan way, we would like to express our thanks for those individuals and their commitment as well. There were elections in red areas, there were elections in blue areas, so the work that your team and elections workers all across the state do is very important for our democracy, so I want to thank that as well. Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a couple of different topics I'd like to talk about. The first one is the VERA system. And, we, in the last administration, and my understanding was they had a competition between 3 contractors to supply it, and they were about to pick one after much analysis. and then administrations changed. Then a year after that, there was a flub up, and people got taken off the rolls, and the administration. I'm not saying you because you're a good friend, and I appreciate all the hard work you do too. But then they blamed it on the last administration. Said they didn't replace Ferris, and here we are, 3 years later after that, and we still don't have our basic software modernized. And I know it must be really hard because otherwise this had to be done by now. Can you kind of share with us why it's taken so long to do this? I mean, it was Verus, for those who don't know, was used every single day in DMVs where most people register to vote. And it was a relational database that we bought from Indiana back in a long time ago, decades ago. And so we've been patching it up. And so we sent you money to buy a new one to pay for this. We used HAVA money for that some time ago. And it's kind of frustrating that we're still talking about Verus to this day. And that's my question.
Okay. Just to correct the history a little bit, when I arrived in 2022, the negotiations with the two vendors that had been determined, I guess there was three, and then they went to the two that scored higher, had kind of slowed down, and that picked back up in April of 2022. Within 6 months, we awarded a contract. In January of 2023, we started the planning, which is part of that. You do planning, and then you do sprints. Since that time, we've conducted 22 sprints. We are using the Agile process, which is an iterative process, which means you complete a sprint, you test what you have, you determine if it's acceptable. If it's not, you put it in the backlog, and you keep going. And you complete more code development.
Madam Chair, can I follow up there? Yeah, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean you have a new product you're testing when you do these sprints, or you're talking about upgrading our underlying system? What does that mean?
It means that you are conducting sprints to develop code to meet requirements. We have 750 requirements in the contract that parallels with the Code of Virginia, what's needed to run elections. You know, it needs to be able to produce absentee ballots and all of the different things that are required in the Code of Virginia.
So bottom line is you're working on this to get a new system. Okay.
We are, Delegate. And I will tell you, I am committed to only going live with a system that has been duly tested and that I am confident will serve registrars and voters in the manner that they deserve.
Okay, I know it's hard. It's just that it just stuck with me that there was blame sharing, in the old days, and it is a hard thing to do. So maybe I can move on to the next thing. Keep up the good work.
Delegate Sickles.
Thank you. So there's a federal law that says you cannot take voters off the ballot within 90 days of an election. And when one day passed after the 90 days, on the 89th day, you decided to take, maybe not you, somebody decided to clean up the voter roll and just like challenging the federal law. I mean, and you were sued, and I think you lost that lawsuit. And then people were taken off the rolls that were legitimate voters. And, there's a reason why the federal government wants us to have our voter rolls in place and not be changing them at the last minute. And I don't know why you couldn't have done this on the 91st day or the 95th day or the 100th day. And maybe people who had been legitimate voters wouldn't have been affected like this. I don't know. Can you tell us more about that?
We have followed the statutorily required process at the Department of Elections that has been in place since 2006. That has not changed. 24.2-410.1 says that the Department of Motor Vehicles sends us the names of individuals who have indicated that they are non-citizens. We notify them and give them a notice that they will be canceled within 14 days if they do not respond to that notice, and then they receive a second notice when they are canceled. On Election Day, if they believe they've been canceled in error, they can register and vote at the same time through same-day registration.
Well, thank goodness we passed that and have same-day registration with this system, or non-system. And what was the litigation like? I mean, what was the litigation about? that
On the advice of the Attorney General, I'm not going to comment on the
okay.
litigation.
Is that is still in process?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm just disappointed that people who were legitimately registered to vote were taken off the voter rolls within 3 months of the election. I mean, that's a fact. And I guess we're going to deal with what comes out of that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Anthony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question to note that there were some issues with the mail-in absentee ballots. Some residents indicated that the ballots were sealed shut where the envelope where they had to put in their final ballot. I know that there were some issues with the printer that came out of North Carolina because of the impact of the storm. What was particular our response, or were there a number of registrars that noted that same thing that voters had issue with, and were the guidelines uniform, and will their guidelines, the registrar's guidelines, be uniform or updated to let voters know if something like that happens again, that you have the ability to open the envelope with a letter opener or something, even if it tears, to put in your final ballot in order to mail in your absentee ballot?
Delegate Price, Delegate Anthony, that was actually a nationwide issue because of all of the humidity and hurricanes that we had at that time of the year. And I think that this is an issue that has been, I've seen it the last couple of years. I think it's exacerbated when you have more people who are getting absentee ballots, obviously, in a presidential. We told voters to call their registrars, and registrars helped voters with that. They accepted their ballots if they had to tape them shut, or they issued them new ballots, depending on what the voter preferred. Some of them were uncomfortable with that and were not going to do that and wanted a new ballot mailed to them. They also offered them the opportunity to come in and vote early if they needed it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Delegate O'Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question about officers of election. I know over the years we've sort of seen that ebb and flow as to the interest of, everyday citizens to step up and get in there and work not only the 13 hours on election day, but the 45 days prior to that. So I guess what was the interest this time around? Was it better or worse or about the same? And, do you now have enough time to where you can see a trend line one way or the other? It feels like something that may have to be addressed in a bigger way in the future, but was curious what you're seeing from your perspective.
Madam Chair, Delegate O'Quinn, there was a lot of national effort to recruit officers of election. There were a lot of groups nationwide that sought to recruit new people to that job. And I think, in our conversations with registrars, they told us they had what they needed. So we were thrilled with that. But I 100% agree with you that it is still an issue where the majority of the people who are doing this job are over the age of 60. And they're not going to be able to do it for forever. And so we definitely need to be actively recruiting younger people. Veterans is a great group that a lot of folks have recruited from, students. There's a lot of opportunities to recruit people to engage in this way.
Thank you. My colleague wanted us to put on the record that 60 is still young. So thank you for the question. Delegate Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question. For the record, I used to be an election officer as well, too, in Prince William County.
Thank you for your service.
Shout out to 709. My question is to confirm, you utilize the same mail system to notify the voters who were being removed from the voter rolls, correct? So for an example, if you were removing voters from the voting roll, you use the United States Postal Service, correct?
Madam Chair, Delegate Henson, that's correct.
And this is the same United States Postal Service that in your presentation we had a lot of issues with when it came to voting this year or last year. Okay, thank you.
Delegate Reed.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Beals, so one of the things that I wanted to ask about is the fact that since we have implemented a lot of new voter access options starting in 2020 and then moving forward, do you have quantifiable data that can either show us an increase in voter participation, either by percent or actual raw number of people that are voting? Because I think we've now had enough elections to be able to compare apples to apples. And so I wanted to see if you had any data that could help shed some light on that.
Right. I looked at that briefly, and like I said, that the turnout percentage has stayed in the 70s for presidentials. The number of people has changed, but I think the other thing you need, and I can get you this information, but I think that the other thing you need to figure into that is the growth in the population of the Commonwealth, right? So when you're saying the raw number of people who voted in an election, went from 2 million in early 2000 to 4 million now, there's a lot of different factors, but I can absolutely get you that information.
Thank you.
Delegate Waxman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask a question about, in the presentation you spoke about same-day voter registration, particularly in the college towns. I didn't know if you could expand a little bit more about what difficulties they may bring there, and if there anything that Elections is doing to follow up on some of the reports that I've heard about. Sometimes hundreds of students may be registered to one specific address that is a university building.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually very proud of a lot of the work that a lot of the colleges did to try to get students to register ahead of the election. They came up with creative ways to try to avoid the long lines on election day that happen with same-day registration, including everything from, putting voter registration information on the napkin holder in the dining hall to say, please go ahead and register to vote, get yourself registered. And, we've been talking internally about that. And I think the crux of the issue comes in, particularly if you have a primary and a general, where if the student is voting in the June primary, they're probably voting at home. Right? So their registration is going to be there. And then when they get to the general, then they're switching their registration to the school and then potentially switching it back. And so we've even been talking internally about, could you try to educate students and say, think ahead. What's your plan to vote? Where are you going to vote? Are you going to vote at school and get an absentee ballot? Are you going to, switch your registration if you do it? How about do it ahead of time? Because you're absolutely right. We did see very long lines, hours and hours of lines of kids on college campuses that were trying to same-day register this year. So anyway, we are planning to reach out to some of the colleges and universities and talk about making sure that the address is sufficient to meet the code requirements and to how they can work with their students ahead of time.
Delegate Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As someone who just ran in a special election, I'd like to give you a little feedback and hear your opinion. So first of all, I want to thank all the workers who were at the polls, all the volunteers. They did a tremendous job. I understand the circumstances were quite challenging. I also want to thank the voters of Loudoun County. They had a general election on November 5th, a primary November 16th, primary November 23rd, early voting on December 11th, and a special election on January 7th. And so there was a lot of confusion amongst them, but I think we did as good of a job as we could have to keep things straight. Given the storm that came, a lot of people decided to vote early. And so there were two early voting days, the 2 Saturdays preceding the special election. And there was at Claude-Moore Rec Center and Dulles South Rec Center, and the Leesburg was open. That was the Office of Elections that was open, not just on those Saturdays. A lot of the demand on that election day was pulled forward, I think, on the Saturday preceding the storm. And so I voted on that Saturday, and there was a 90-minute wait, and it was 25, 26 degrees with wind chill factor making it in the low teens. And it was quite unbearable for a lot of people. And we could say that that was just a one-time thing because of the storm. But what I've experienced at the polls on general elections is we funnel a huge amount of people to Dulles South Rec Center. I know I'm being very parochial here, but I'm just using this as an example. We funnel a huge amount of people at Dulles South Rec Center on early voting days, and there are 15, 20, 30-minute waits. But then when you go to the polls on election day itself, there's like a 1-minute wait at most. And you saw that the pie chart that you showed, the sheer quantity of people who are voting early. And I'm wondering what you think some solutions might be to reduce the disparity between wait times for early voting compared to wait times during election day.
Mm-hmm. Madam Chair, Delegate Singh, that would be a hyper-local issue and would be something that the Electoral Board of Loudoun County would need to address in terms of how they are allocating early voting locations in their county. And based upon the traffic that they saw during the special election, I would think that would inform some of their choices moving forward for where they're seeing people turn out to vote early. My job is uniformity across the state, so that everybody follows the same laws. When everybody enters in a polling place, they are treated the same way. And so we have such a diverse state, and we have a lot of localities that are teeny tiny where they're never going to have a satellite location. It's only ever going to be at their registrar's office. So I think when you have such a very heightened awareness about a special election, you are going to see a situation like that. I'm sorry that people were freezing in the cold. That's terrible that they had to wait that long. But I think that is a local issue that has to be addressed locally.
Delegate Converse-Fowler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. Madam Chair, so I think we've talked about this previously, but the identifiers that caused or triggered people to be pulled from the rolls, so the list maintenance, I think we talked about it through DMV, was the citizenship part of it that had a yes or no, but I think there was a lingering question about like, well, what if it was blank? Or the website, when you go through that, how it leads you a certain way. What identifying information was sent over to you all? Like, what discrepancies did you end up finding? I know you were looking for this later, that were identifiable to why certain people got pulled off the rolls and others didn't.
Right. So we're in active communication with DMV to address that at this moment. We have groups that are working together to get to the bottom of that.
We would, I think, love to hear back from those work groups. I do not see any further questions. Yep, okay. Thank you very much for coming to give us that information. At this time, that is the end of our agenda. But please stay close. As soon as IT and the clerk's office have switched everything over, Chair Glass and the Elections Administration Subcommittee will begin. But for now, I will entertain a motion for the full committee to adjourn. It's been moved and properly seconded that we will adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? We are officially adjourned. Thank you.